Hi, and welcome to this edition of the podcast V for Vegan. This is your host, Anthony McGrath. Thank you for joining us to discuss this topic. Please consider buying the book from Amazon, 14-Day Vegan. Like or subscribe and tell your friends to listen to this podcast. At some point, when discussing the issue of being a vegan, somebody will ask you, don't plants feel pain? Don't they have feelings too? As if to justify the pointless, painful slaughter of billions of animals because you, as a vegan, honestly have not considered this point. All this indicates is the mindset of the questioner. There are no dumb questions, just ones that you do not ask. As you process these questions, as a non-vegan, you probably have a natural assumption that plants do or do not feel pain. Whatever your stance, it may seem pretty straightforward. As it turns out, the answer to this question can harbor a degree of unimaginable complexity. If you're vegan, you probably cringe every time someone asks you these questions or assails any moral high ground with the statement, if you care about killing animals, why don't you care about killing plants? Then you non-confidently mumble back a response about how plants don't have a central nervous system so scientifically. They can't feel pain. While this statement is somewhat true, there's more to consider about the sentience of plants. I get the intent behind the questions. If plants have feelings and can experience pain, then what's the difference between eating animals and plants? Why is there an arbitrary hierarchy of suffering? These questions go to the heart of the true issue of honoring all life on earth. Theophilosophically, the person who asks or makes the statements is probably not interested in a long-ass reply, however you might ask them if they have ever studied the science of pain. Let's look at the science and facts before offering personal opinions at the end. Let's get into it. What's pain, and how does it work? To understand if plants feel pain, we must first define what pain is. The fact is that no two humans experience pain in quite the same way. As a therapist who has worked with thousands of people around the globe, I know this to be true. Science confirms this and adds in such curveballs as phantom limb pain, and also the complete absence of pain in diseases such as leprosy. Quite Zen-like. Does the pain exist if I cannot feel it? A single cell will move away from a stimulus that it cannot process. This stimulus may be negative to its survival, but the same cell will also move forward towards a stimulus that it can process and which may be largely beneficial to its survival. At a cellular level, we are making qualitative and quantitative measurements and choices. Humans are a collection of 37 trillion cells, many of which have developed highly specialized functions. A quick Google search reveals that pain is a highly unpleasant physical sensation caused by illness or injury. Okay, that seems pretty obvious. Let's get a little more specific. Animals, humans, and non-humans perceive pain through sensory nerve cells. The same network of cells that process our sight, touch, smell, hearing, and taste. As explained in the textbook Pain and Disability, Clinical, Behavioral, and Public Policy Perspectives, pain receptors, which are present in most body tissues, respond to damaging or potentially damaging stimuli. Messages initiated by these stimuli are transmitted by nerve cells to the spinal cord and the brain, your central nervous system. If the brain perceives the threat to be legitimate, it responds by creating a sensation of pain to direct attention to the body part so that the danger can be mitigated. It's like if you were to hit your big toe on the bottom of your bed frame. The impact of the connection creates stimuli. From there, the nerve cells send pulses to your brain, which the brain identifies, approves, and creates the sensation of pain associated with your big toe. The pain is only felt in your brain. Other receptors feed things locally to ganglia, nerve bodies that act with local intelligence to create a localized response. With this information, you analyze the risk of further pain by avoiding repeated action. Additionally, your brain signals not to put pressure on your toe to give it time to heal. We must also remember that pain is a subjective emotion, not just a physical response. Loss or gain may provoke complex emotions and neurological or remembered responses, which may be intense and register as painful. Animals also share a similar structure to us, namely being made up of a large number of cells, many of which are specialized. Aminals may have adapted to their environment by developing thick skin or other developments that contain the same pain or pressure sensors. So not only do they feel and process physical pain much in the same way as us, but they can also experience complex pain-related emotions such as fear, sadness, and anger. For example, a cow may experience trauma from being separated from her calf after birth, much like how a human mother might experience the same emotional pain of separation when separated from her child. To summarize, pain is the process of turning stimuli into a subjective physical and emotional pattern stored in the brain to mitigate future risks and promote healing. It requires a brain-like structure. What's a plant? Plants are living organisms that come in many different forms. We've come to know them as trees, shrubs, herbs, grasses, ferns, and mosses. There are three basic structures of a plant. 1. The leaf is an organ of a plant that captures energy from sunlight. Leaves also collect carbon dioxide from the air. 2. The stem is the core structure of a plant that supports leaves, branches, and flowers. Stems have vascular tissues that move food and water around the plant to help it thrive and grow. Plants often store food in stems. 3. The roots of a plant grow underground and help the plant stay balanced, while also gathering minerals and water from the soil. Some plants store food in their roots. There are almost 400,000 plant species, and scientists are discovering more each day. To put it simply, plants rule the world, representing 80% of the Earth's biomass. Much of the world's oxygen was created and is maintained by plants. I love plants, as we owe our existence to them. They provide food, shelter, shade, clean air, beauty, and medicine. Plants, in many ways, represent life. It's essential to acknowledge the overwhelming significance of plants as we consider the emotions of this infinitely generous species, a case for why plants feel pain and have emotion. In this next section, we break down 3 case studies that are regularly referenced when making an argument that plants feel pain. 1. Plants can hear themselves being eaten by caterpillars. In a paper published in 2014 titled Plants Respond to Leaf Vibrations, caused by insect herbivore chewing. Researchers found plants increased their chemical response to the vibrations caused by a caterpillar chewing. The study involved placing caterpillars on plants called Arabidopsis, then using lasers and reflective materials to measure the movement of the leaf in response to the caterpillar munching. The recordings of the caterpillar's feeding vibrations were played back to a set of plants and played in silence to another set of plants. It was found that the plants that had been forced to listen to the sound of the vibrations from the munching produced more mustard oils, which are chemicals insects don't like. The argument here is that plants respond to pain by producing defense mechanisms when they detect a threat. 2. Plants can communicate with each other. In a paper published in 1983, titled Rapid Changes in Tree Leaf Chemistry Induced by Damage, Evidence for Communication Between Plants, researchers found signs of communication amongst maple trees as a response to intentionally cutting their leaves. Specifically, increased rates of synthesis and phenolic compounds were found amongst a group of maple seedlings 52 hours after having 7% of their leaf area removed from tearing. The argument here is that plants can release chemicals as a form of communication to warn other plants of the threat as a reaction to pain. This paper was met with a lot of controversies as early studies could not be replicated. Then another paper published in 2014 titled Volatile Communication Between Plants That Affects Herbivory. A meta-analysis stated that they found 48 well-replicated studies since the 1983 research. Through their meta-analysis, they found overall support for the hypothesis that resistance increased for individuals with damaged neighbors. But, like most research, they stated in the conclusion that more testing is required for consistency of results and adjusted for environmental variables. For example, all of the studies reviewed so far occurred in a lab, not in nature, which may be a factor when analyzing the communication between plants. The other question mark in the testing is the lack of reciprocation in communication between the plant subjects. It appears that when herbivores attack a plant, the plant emits communications to others, but there's no evidence of the other plants communicating to the emitter. This suggests that the response of the emitter is more of a message or broadcast of warning, as opposed to a cry for help. 3. Plants are reportedly screaming when under stress. In a paper published in December 2019, titled Plants Emit Informative Airborne Sounds Under Stress, researchers found that plants emit high-pitched sounds when threatened. Specifically, they recorded the sound waves for tomato and tobacco plants when dry, cut, and normal. The results showed that when the plant was under stress, dried or cut, they found the plants began to emit ultrasonic sounds between 20 and 100 kHz. Plants emit sounds that humans can't hear without assistance. So the researchers used ultrasonic microphones to detect the sound waves in the study. Keep in mind that this paper is not peer-reviewed at the time of publishing this post, but the results do raise an interesting element to the plants have feelings debate. If plants are, in fact, screaming when under stress, we can make the assumption that they do at least react to stimulus. We might label this stimulus as pain, a case for why plants don't feel pain and have emotions. Whether it's reacting to vibrations, sending warning signals, or screaming, we still have much to learn about plants. These examples together put forward a compelling case for plants being able to experience pain. The acute sensitivity of the fungi observed at the cellular level argues for the presence of a mind. Just like the animal brain, the fungal mind is aware of and responds to its environment. Awareness is not a unique privilege of the human mind, but it exists in many forms throughout nature. Having said that, the argument for why plants don't feel pain or emotions doesn't need much explaining. It all comes down to biology. As explained earlier in this post, pain is an experience that incorporates communication between stimuli, receptors, cells, and the central nervous system. It's one thing to merely react to a threat, and it's another thing to intellectualize it. Animals suffer from pain because they consciously process pain. It's the brain and spinal cords that make us aware of the pain, again, which is a subjective response based on complex emotions. However, the important point is animals experience suffering, physical, mental, emotional, and psychological suffering. The examples of plants releasing chemicals and sounds without the processing from a central nervous system can be considered to be a basic stimulus response. It's similar to how plants react to stimuli from the sun, water, or soil. These responses draw technology comparisons. For instance, when you press the button on a doorbell, it responds by making a noise. Or when the battery on your phone gets low, it responds by flashing. These are responses, not intellectually processed emotion. The famous Venus flytrap plant. Another example that is perhaps more relevant than technology is the well-known plant, Venus flytrap. Venus flytrap is a carnivorous plant that eats insects, frogs, and human flesh if given the opportunity. This unusual plant lures in prey by using the sweet scent of its nectar. Once the prey is at the jaws of the Venus flytrap, the plant gets ready to snap shut. Professors from the University of Tasmania have said that Venus flytraps don't recognize animals. They respond to mechanical stimulation. This is further proven by the Venus flytrap responding to a cigarette placed in its jaws. If the plant had a central nervous system, it would be able to consciously discern its prey to consume the most optimal nutrients for its biology. You can't just give any animal a rock to eat. They would consciously process potential food using their sensory cells and their brain. It's the same system used to process fear, sadness, and suffering. The final thoughts on whether plants have feelings. There's no question that we're learning more about plants every year, and the research about how they respond to stimuli is fascinating. But even after reading the research, I couldn't see any clear peer-reviewed evidence of plants showing anything beyond mechanical response to stimuli. The examples of plants responding to cuts, munching on leaves, and drought seem obvious to me. Plants also react to music, quality soil, surrounding objects, and sunshine. Does it mean that they're consciously responding to these situations? I think not. Plants that are animals. Some Mesodinium species are different, however. They engulf other microorganisms, generally algae called cryptomonads. The two then form a partnership. The algae produce sugars by photosynthesis, while the Mesodinium protects them and carries them around. These hybrids play merry hell with our attempts to classify organisms into neat groups. The division between plants and animals is collapsing completely, said one botanist. Now, are plants living organisms? Absolutely, and humans generally treat them that way. We often refer to a plant as happy, sad, dead, or alive. Eating them makes us happy, satiated, or distressed, especially if the plant is toxic or poisonous. In the Cherokee story, the animal world is driven to revolt against the abuses they have suffered at human hands and vow to destroy all the people and reclaim the lands they have lost. The war councils of the bears, deer, fish, and reptiles, birds, insects, and small animals come to the same conclusion that humans have become too barbaric and intolerable and must be destroyed. Various methods are agreed upon, but it is finally decided that disease will be the most effective. At this point, the plants step in as humanity's defenders, promising their resources to ensure the people's survival. The real issue is that we need to honor all life, both vegetable and animal. Abuse is not the answer. If it is not happening to you, it does not mean that it is not happening. So, until next time, keep open and keep changing. This is your host, Anthony McGrath, signing off.
This has been a production of Spirit Quest Publications, a division of Anthony and Mary Holistic Health Services, LLC. All rights reserved.